The stagecoach lurched to a stop in the frozen mud of San Diego, California, and Grace Norton pressed her gloved hand against the frost-covered window, her breath catching at the desolate winter landscape stretching before her. She had traveled 3,000 miles from Boston to marry a stranger, and now, stepping down onto the icy ground in her thin traveling dress, she wondered if she had made the greatest mistake of her life. The year was 1872, and San Diego was nothing like the letters had promised. Instead of golden sunshine and endless summer, a rare winter storm had gripped the small frontier town, covering everything in sheets of ice and making the adobe buildings look even more foreign and forbidding than she had imagined. A man stood waiting near the station, tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind despite the current cold. He removed his hat as she approached, revealing dark hair streaked with early gray, though he could not have been more than 30. His eyes were a startling blue against his tanned skin, and they held an expression Grace could not quite read as he looked at her. "Miss Grace Norton." His voice was deep and careful, as though he was choosing each word with deliberation. "Yes, you must be Mr. Dalton Xavier." She tried to keep her voice steady, but it trembled slightly from both cold and nerves. "I am. I apologize for the weather. This is not what I promised you in my letters." He gestured at the gray sky and the ice-crusted streets. "San Diego is usually warm, even in January. This storm came down from the north 3 days ago and shows no sign of breaking." Grace pulled her inadequate cloak tighter around her shoulders. "I suppose neither of us can control the weather, Mr. Xavier." Something flickered in his eyes, perhaps appreciation for her practical response. "No, we cannot, but I can get you somewhere warm. My ranch is about 5 miles outside of town. I have a wagon waiting." He hesitated, then added, "I know this is not what you expected, any of it. If you want time to think to stay in town at the boarding house, I would understand." The offer surprised her. Most mail-order bride arrangements she had heard about left women with little choice once they arrived. The man she had corresponded with for 6 months had seemed kind in his letters, but letters could lie. His face could lie. Yet there was something in his careful consideration, in the way he stood at a respectful distance, that made her believe his concern was genuine. "I did not travel 3,000 miles to stay at a boarding house, Mr. Xavier. I came to marry you, and I intend to keep my word." She lifted her chin slightly, meeting his gaze directly. "If you still wish to marry me, that is." "I do." The words came quickly, almost before she had finished speaking. Then he seemed to catch himself and added more slowly, "I mean yes. I would be honored if you would still consent to be my wife. You are even more beautiful than I imagined from your photograph, but more than that, you seem to have courage. That matters more out here than beauty." Grace felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the bitter cold. "Then let us proceed as planned, though perhaps not today if you do not mind. The journey has been long and I confess I am quite exhausted." "Of course. I was not suggesting we marry immediately. I thought tomorrow or whenever you feel ready." He picked up her trunk as though it weighed nothing and gestured toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. "Please, let me help you up. I have blankets in the wagon." The ride to the ranch took nearly an hour through the freezing landscape. Dalton had indeed provided thick wool blankets, and Grace wrapped herself in them gratefully as the wagon jolted along the rutted road. He drove in silence for a while, focused on navigating the icy conditions, but finally he spoke. "I want to explain about the ranch, so you know what you are coming to." He kept his eyes on the road ahead. "It is not large, but it is mine, free and clear. I have about 200 head of cattle and a dozen horses. The house is adobe, 4 rooms with a good fireplace. I have a hired man, Miguel, who helps with the cattle. He has a small cabin on the property. There is no woman there to help you, I am afraid. I have been alone since my mother passed 2 years ago." "You lived with your mother?" Grace asked, finding this detail touching. "I built the ranch for her. My father died when I was 15, and she had a hard time after that. When I finally had enough money saved, I brought her out here from Texas. She loved California, loved the warmth and the ocean nearby. She had 3 good years here before her heart gave out." His voice carried old grief, carefully controlled. "I am sorry for your loss." Grace meant it. She knew about loss. Her own parents had died in a fire when she was 17, leaving her dependent on a cold aunt who had made it clear Grace was a burden. At 22, with no prospects and no money, becoming a mail-order bride had seemed like her only escape from a life of drudgery as an unpaid servant in her aunt's household. "Thank you. She would have liked you, I think. She always said I needed someone with sense, not just a pretty face." He glanced at her briefly, then back at the road. "I hope I did not offend you. I only meant that you seem sensible as well as lovely." "I am not offended, Mr. Xavier. In fact, I appreciate plain speaking. There has been enough deception in my life. I would prefer honesty between us, even if it is sometimes uncomfortable." "Then I will give you honesty." He was quiet for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts. "I am 32 years old. I have been alone for too long. I am not an easy man. I work hard and I expect hard work from those around me. But I am fair and I keep my word. I will never raise my hand to you in anger. I will provide for you as best I can. And I will try to make you happy, though I admit I am not certain I remember how to make anyone happy." The bleakness in those last words caught at Grace's heart. "What about you, Mr. Xavier? Do you remember how to be happy yourself?" He did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "I am not sure I do, but I keep hoping I will relearn it. That is why I sent for you." The loneliness was becoming too much to bear. They arrived at the ranch as the weak winter sun was beginning to set. The house was low and solid, built of adobe bricks with a wooden porch along the front. Smoke rose from the chimney, and as they approached, a man emerged from the barn. He was older than Dalton, perhaps 50, with gray hair and a weathered brown face that spoke of Mexican heritage. "Miguel, this is Miss Norton. She will be my wife." Dalton jumped down from the wagon and came around to help Grace descend. Miguel swept off his hat and bowed slightly. "Welcome, señorita. I am very pleased to meet you. The house is warm. I have kept the fire going all day." "Thank you, Miguel. That is very kind." Grace smiled at him, grateful for his courteous welcome. Dalton carried her trunk into the house, and Grace followed, curious and apprehensive about her new home. The front door opened into a main room that served as both kitchen and living area. The fireplace dominated one wall, with a good fire crackling in it. The furniture was simple but well made. A table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair near the fire, shelves along the walls holding dishes and supplies. Everything was clean and orderly, though it had the austere feel of a place inhabited only by men. "The bedroom is through that door." Dalton indicated a doorway to the left. "I have been sleeping in the small room off the kitchen. I will continue to do so until we are married, and after, if you prefer. I do not expect anything from you that you are not ready to give." Grace felt another rush of gratitude for his consideration. "You are very kind, Mr. Xavier. May I call you Dalton? It seems odd to be so formal with a man I am to marry." "I would like that. And may I call you Grace? Please do." He showed her the rest of the house. The bedroom was small but adequate, with a real bed covered in quilts, a dresser, and a window that would look out over the valley in better weather. The other small room held only a narrow cot and a chest. The fourth room was a storage area filled with supplies, tools, and preserves. "It is not much," Dalton said, standing in the doorway of the bedroom. "But it is solid and warm, and in spring you will see how beautiful the land is. Right now everything is frozen and dead, but when the wildflowers bloom, the entire valley turns gold and purple and orange. The hills stay green until summer. There is a creek that runs year-round just beyond those trees, and the ocean is only an hour's ride west." Grace turned to look at him. In the lamplight, his face was softer, less weathered. She could see the hope in his eyes, the need for her to not be disappointed. "It is more than I had in Boston. My aunt's house was large, but none of it belonged to me. Here, you are offering me a home, a real home. That means more than you might think." Something eased in his expression. "I am glad. Are you hungry?" "I'm afraid I am not much of a cook, but I can manage stew and biscuits." "Let me cook," Grace offered. "I am actually quite good at it, and I would like to make myself useful." They worked together in the kitchen, an awkward but not unpleasant dance as they learned each other's rhythms. Grace made a better stew than Dalton had promised, using the supplies she found in the pantry and adding herbs that hung dried from the rafters. Dalton set the table and sliced bread, moving around her carefully, always maintaining a respectful distance. Over dinner, they talked more easily than they had in the wagon. Dalton told her about the ranch, about his hopes to expand the herd, about the challenges of ranching in California. Grace told him about Boston, about the books she loved to read, about her parents and the happy childhood that had ended too soon with the fire. "What was the worst part?" Dalton asked quietly. "After they died, I mean." Grace considered the question. "The worst part was becoming invisible. My aunt took me in out of duty, not love. I became a servant in all but name, but worse than a servant because I was not even paid. I had no future, no prospects. I was educated enough to know what I was missing but powerless to change it. When I saw your advertisement, it felt like a door opening in a wall I thought was solid." "I will never make you feel invisible," Dalton said, and there was a fierce promise in his voice. "You matter, Grace. You matter to me already, and we have only just met." That night, lying in the bedroom that would be hers at least until the wedding, Grace felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. It felt almost like hope. The next morning dawned still cold and gray. Grace woke to find Dalton already up and working. Through the window, she could see him in the corral with the horses, his breath steaming in the frigid air. She dressed quickly in the cold room and went to the kitchen to start breakfast. By the time Dalton came in, stamping snow from his boots, she had eggs frying and coffee brewing on the stove. His face lit up when he saw her. "You did not have to do this. I would have made breakfast. I wanted to. Besides, I suspect my cooking is better than yours." She smiled at him over her shoulder and he laughed, a warm sound that transformed his serious face. "You are absolutely right about that. I can manage not to starve, but that is about the limit of my skills." They ate together and Dalton asked, "What would you like to do today? We could go back to town if you wish. There is a preacher there if you still want to marry soon, or we could wait. There is no rush." Grace had been thinking about this through the sleepless hours of the night. "I think soon would be best. Why wait? We have both committed to this path. Delaying will only make it more awkward. Tomorrow, then, that would give us today to prepare, and you could have one more night to be certain." "Tomorrow," Grace agreed. They spent the day in domestic tasks. Grace cleaned the house thoroughly, adding small touches that made it more homey. She found a piece of lace in her trunk and used it to cover the rough table. She arranged the dishes more attractively on the shelves. Dalton watched her with a pleased expression, as though seeing his house transformed. In the afternoon, Miguel came to the main house with a gift, a beautiful serape woven in red and gold that he said had belonged to his late wife. "For the señorita," he said. For warmth and for luck in her marriage. Grace was touched nearly to tears by the gesture. "Thank you, Miguel. I will treasure it." That evening, Dalton asked if she would like to walk with him, despite the cold. They bundled up and went out into the frozen twilight. He led her to the creek he had mentioned, which was partly frozen, the water running dark beneath a skin of ice. "I come here when I need to think," he said. "There is something about moving water that settles my mind." They stood together in the cold silence, their breath making clouds in the air. Finally, Dalton spoke. "Grace, I want you to know something before we marry. I am not a romantic man. I will likely never write you poetry or say the flowery things that women like to hear. But I will work every day to build a good life for us. I will be faithful to you always. And I will try my best to be a good husband, even if I am clumsy at it." Grace turned to look at him. In the fading light, his face was all plains and shadows, strong and honest. "Dalton, I do not need poetry. I need exactly what you are offering: faithfulness, hard work, honesty. The rest will come. Perhaps not love, not immediately, but affection and respect and partnership. Those are not small things." "You do not expect love?" He sounded surprised. "I hope for it," Grace said carefully, "but I do not demand it. Love is not something that can be forced or hurried. If it comes, it comes. If not, a good marriage can still be built on other foundations." Dalton reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and took her gloved hand in his. "You are a wise woman, Grace Norton. I am glad you came, even in winter. Spring will come, and so will happiness here. I truly believe that." His words, simple and earnest, wrapped around her heart like warmth. She squeezed his hand. "I believe it too." The wedding took place the next day in the small adobe church in San Diego. The preacher was a thin man with kind eyes who had seen many such hasty frontier weddings. Miguel stood as witness, along with the preacher's wife, a plump woman who cried happily through the brief ceremony. Grace wore her best dress, a deep green wool that brought out her eyes. Dalton had surprised her by appearing in a clean white shirt and black coat, his hair still damp from washing. He looked almost handsome, she thought, and then amended that. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way that suited this land. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Dalton kissed her carefully, briefly, his lips warm against hers. It was Grace's first kiss, and it made her heart race in a way that was both frightening and thrilling. They returned to the ranch as husband and wife. The day was still bitterly cold, and when they arrived home, Dalton immediately set about building up the fire. Grace prepared a special dinner from the supplies she had found in the pantry, making a roast and potatoes, and even attempting a pie. Over dinner, the reality of their situation seemed to settle on both of them. They were married now. This was not temporary or tentative. They had made vows before God and man. "Are you frightened?" Dalton asked quietly as they cleared the dishes together. Grace considered lying, then remembered her own words about honesty. "A little. This is all very new to me as well. I have not been with a woman in a very long time, Grace, and never with a wife. I will not rush you. We can take this as slowly as you need." But Grace had been thinking about this too. She was a practical woman, and she knew that putting off the inevitable would only make it harder. "I do not want to wait, Dalton. I am nervous, yes, but I trust you, and this is part of marriage. I want to start our life together properly." He looked at her with such gratitude and tenderness that it took her breath away. "Then come here," he said softly. He led her to the bedroom and lit the lamp on the dresser. The room filled with golden light. He stood before her, tall and solid, and reached up to gently cup her face in his rough hands. "You are beautiful, Grace. I want you to know that I see that, and I am grateful every moment that you chose to come here to marry me." Then he kissed her again, longer this time, deeper, and Grace felt something awaken in her that she had not known was sleeping. His hands were gentle as he helped her undress, and his touch was reverent as he learned the curves of her body. She explored him in turn, fascinated by the hard planes of his chest, the scars that marked his skin, the strength in his arms. What followed was awkward at times, as first times often are, but it was also tender and careful and surprisingly sweet. Dalton was patient with her nervousness, and Grace discovered that her body knew things her mind had not yet learned. When it was over, they lay tangled together under the quilts, and Grace felt a bone-deep contentment she had not expected. "Are you all right?" Dalton asked, stroking her hair back from her face. "More than all right. That was lovely." He laughed softly, a happy sound. "It will get better, I promise, as we learn each other better." Grace nestled closer to him, feeling safe in a way she had not felt since her parents died. "I am glad I married you, Dalton Xavier." "I am glad you married me too, Grace Xavier." The use of her new name made her smile in the darkness. She was Grace Xavier now, wife of a California rancher, and despite the frozen landscape outside, she felt warm all the way through. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Grace kept the house and did the cooking while Dalton and Miguel worked with the cattle and horses. The weather remained bitterly cold, and ice continued to grip the land. It was hard work just to keep the animals fed and watered when the creek kept freezing over. But inside the adobe house, there was warmth. Grace and Dalton learned each other in the way new couples do, through small conversations and shared tasks and quiet evenings by the fire. Grace discovered that Dalton had a dry sense of humor that emerged once he relaxed. Dalton discovered that Grace had a beautiful singing voice and loved to read aloud. At night, they learned each other's bodies with increasing skill and pleasure. The awkwardness of the first time gave way to a comfortable intimacy. Dalton was an attentive lover, always concerned with her pleasure as well as his own. Grace found herself looking forward to bedtime with an eagerness that would have shocked her Boston relatives. 2 weeks after the wedding, Grace woke to find the ice finally beginning to melt. The temperature had risen overnight and water was dripping from the eaves. Dalton came in from morning chores with a smile on his face. "The storm is breaking. Another few days and this will all be over." But the thaw brought new problems. That afternoon, Miguel came to the house with grim news. "Senor Dalton, the cattle, many of them are sick. The cold and the ice, it was too much." Dalton's face went pale. "How many?" "Maybe 20, maybe more, and others are weak. We need to bring them closer where we can watch them." Dalton grabbed his coat. "Grace, I have to go. This could be bad if we lose too many head." "Go," she said immediately. "Do what you need to do. I will be fine here." He kissed her quickly and left with Miguel. Grace did not see him again until well after dark, when he came in exhausted and covered in mud. His face was drawn with worry. "We lost 15 head today. Others are still sick. If this continues, it could ruin us." Grace helped him out of his wet clothes and brought him hot coffee and food. "What can be done? We keep watch through the night. We try to save as many as we can, and we pray the weather holds." He rubbed his face wearily. "I am sorry, Grace. This is not the life I promised you. You promised me the truth, Dalton, not perfection. How can I help?" Over the next few days, Grace learned what it really meant to be a rancher's wife. She carried endless buckets of water, helped Miguel make medicines for the sick cattle, and cooked meals at odd hours to feed the men who worked around the clock. She got little sleep, and her hands became rough and chapped, but she did not complain. Dalton watched her work with growing admiration. This refined Boston woman had thrown herself into the hard labor without hesitation. She mucked out stalls, hauled feed, and even helped hold down a calf while he treated a wound. She never once suggested that this was beneath her, or that she had expected something different. One night, nearly a week into the crisis, they stood together in the barn watching over a cow that was struggling to survive. Grace leaned against Dalton's shoulder, bone-tired. "Will she make it?" Grace asked. "I do not know, I hope so." He put his arm around her waist. "Grace, I need to tell you something. I am falling in love with you." She looked up at him in surprise. "What?" "I know it is soon. I know we have only been married a few weeks. But watching you these past days, seeing how hard you work, how you never complain, how strong you are, I cannot help it. I am falling in love with you." Grace felt tears prick her eyes. "Dalton, I think I am falling in love with you too. I did not expect it to happen so fast. But you are such a good man. You work so hard and you are so honest and kind. How could I not love you?" He kissed her then, a deep kiss full of emotion and promise. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling despite their exhaustion. "Spring will come," Dalton said, repeating the words he had spoken when she first arrived. "And happiness is already here." They lost 23 head in total before the crisis passed. It was a blow to the ranch's finances, but not a fatal one. As the weather finally turned warmer and the last of the ice melted away, Dalton and Miguel worked to rebuild the herd and care for the surviving cattle. Grace watched the land transform as winter gave way to early spring. True to Dalton's words, wildflowers began to appear, first in small patches and then in great sweeping waves of color. The hills turned impossibly green and the creek ran full and clear. Birds returned, filling the air with song. The ranch came alive in a way that made Grace understand why Dalton's mother had loved this place. The ocean winds brought the smell of salt water, and on clear days, they could see all the way to the blue line of the Pacific in the distance. The sun was warm but not oppressive, and the nights were cool and perfect for sleeping. Grace began to make the ranch truly her own. She planted a garden near the house, starting vegetables and herbs from seeds she had brought from Boston. She made curtains for the windows from fabric Dalton bought her in town. She befriended Miguel's daughter, Rosa, who lived in San Diego and came to visit sometimes, and the two women traded recipes and gossip. As spring deepened, Grace realized something else. She was pregnant. She had suspected it for a few weeks but had not been certain. When she finally told Dalton, his face went through a series of emotions: shock, joy, fear, and finally settling on a deep happiness. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy about it?" Grace asked, suddenly uncertain. "Happy, Grace, I am thrilled. Scared but thrilled." He pulled her into his arms. "You are going to be a mother. We are going to be parents." The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Grace felt well if tired, and continued to help around the ranch as much as Dalton would allow. He had become protective, constantly worried that she was working too hard or lifting too much. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him one afternoon when he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry for her. "I know, but I want to take care of you. Humor me." She smiled and kissed his cheek. "Very well, but only because I love you. And I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone." They had fallen into the habit of saying these words often, as though making up for the months they had lived without love in their lives. Each time Dalton said he loved her, Grace felt a warmth spread through her chest. Each time she said it to him, she saw his face soften with joy. Summer came, hot and golden. The ranch thrived under Dalton's careful management. He had taken the money saved from selling the healthy cattle and invested in better stock. The herd was slowly recovering from the winter losses. Miguel reported that the new calves were strong and healthy. Grace's belly swelled with the growing baby. In the evenings, Dalton would sit with her and place his hand on her stomach, marveling when he felt the baby kick. "He is strong," Dalton said. "Or she," Grace reminded him with a smile. "Or she. I do not care which, as long as you both come through healthy." As Grace's due date approached in late autumn, Dalton grew increasingly nervous. He arranged for Rosa to come stay at the ranch to help with the birth, and he rode into San Diego to fetch the doctor and make sure he would be available when the time came. "I am going to wear a path in the floor with your pacing," Grace teased him one evening. "I cannot help it. I am terrified something will go wrong." Grace took his hand and placed it on her belly where the baby was moving actively. "Feel that. That is a strong, healthy baby, and I am strong and healthy too. Everything will be fine." But despite her confident words, Grace was frightened too. She had heard the stories of women who died in childbirth, of babies who did not survive. She prayed every night for a safe delivery. When her labor began on a cool October morning, everything happened faster than anyone expected. Dalton sent Miguel racing for the doctor, but the baby was in a hurry. Rosa and Dalton stayed with Grace, helping her through the pain and fear. "You can do this, my Amor," Dalton kept saying, holding her hand and wiping her forehead with a cool cloth. "You are the strongest person I know." And she was strong. After 6 hours of hard labor, Grace gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The doctor arrived just in time to cut the cord and confirm that both mother and child were well. Dalton held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect." "Grace, he is perfect. What should we name him?" Grace asked, exhausted but happy. Dalton thought for a moment. "What about Daniel, after my father, Daniel Xavier? I like that. Hello, Daniel." She touched the baby's tiny hand and his fingers curled around hers reflexively. The first months of parenthood were exhausting but joyful. Daniel was a good baby, healthy and strong. Dalton was a devoted father, getting up in the night to bring the baby to Grace for feeding, rocking him when he cried, and spending endless hours just watching him sleep. "I never knew I could love someone this much," Dalton said one night, holding Daniel while Grace prepared dinner. "I love you more than I thought possible, and now I love him just as much. My heart feels too full." Grace kissed them both. "I know exactly what you mean. Sometimes I look at the two of you, and I can hardly believe this is my life. A year ago I was so unhappy, so lost, and now I have everything I could ever want." As Daniel grew, the ranch continued to prosper. The herd expanded, and Dalton was able to hire another worker to help Miguel. He bought more land, extending the ranch boundaries. He built an addition onto the house, adding 2 more rooms for their growing family. When Daniel was 2 years old, Grace became pregnant again. This time Dalton was less anxious, though still protective. The second birth was easier than the first, and they welcomed a daughter they named Margaret, after Grace's mother. "Now we have one of each," Grace said, holding Margaret while Daniel climbed onto the bed to meet his sister. "Baby," Daniel said, patting Margaret's head gently. "Yes, that is your baby sister. You are going to be a wonderful big brother," Grace told him. The years passed in a pattern of hard work, love, and growing happiness. The children thrived. Daniel was serious and thoughtful like his father, while Margaret was spirited and adventurous. A third child, a son they named Thomas, arrived 2 years after Margaret. The ranch became one of the most successful in the San Diego area. Dalton's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to save money and make improvements. But despite their growing prosperity, they never forgot the lessons learned during that first terrible winter. Grace remained actively involved in running the ranch, working alongside Dalton even as she raised their children. She was respected in the community as a capable woman who was not afraid of hard work. Other ranch wives sought her advice, and she became known for her hospitality and kindness. Miguel remained with them, becoming almost like family. He taught the children Spanish and how to ride, and he took great pride in watching them grow. Rosa and her family became close friends, and their children played together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Dalton took Grace back to the creek where they had walked the night before their wedding. It was spring again, and the wildflowers were in full bloom, just as they had been every spring since. "You remember what I told you that first winter?" Dalton asked, holding her hand as they stood by the water. "You said spring would come and so would happiness. I was right, was I not?" He pulled her close. "Grace, these 10 years with you have been the best of my life. You took a lonely, difficult man and taught him how to love, how to be happy. You gave me children and a home and a reason to get up every morning. I love you more now than I did even that first spring when I realized I was falling for you." Grace laid her head on his shoulder. "I love you too, Dalton. You saved me, you know. I was drowning in Boston, invisible and forgotten. You saw me. You gave me a place to belong, work that mattered, and love beyond measure. Coming here was the best decision I ever made." They stood together in the spring sunshine, older now and marked by years of hard work and joy, but still deeply in love. The creek babbled beside them, the wildflowers swayed in the breeze, and in the distance they could hear their children playing. Another 10 years passed. Daniel grew into a young man much like his father, serious, hardworking, and kind. He took to ranching naturally and became Dalton's right hand. Margaret inherited her mother's practical nature and her father's determination. She announced at 15 that she wanted to study to become a teacher, and Grace and Dalton supported her ambitions. Thomas was the adventurous one, always exploring, always asking questions about everything. Grace and Dalton grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had weathered many challenges, droughts and floods, cattle diseases and difficult calvings, the occasional conflict with neighboring ranchers, and the everyday struggles of raising 3 children. Through it all, they had relied on each other, their partnership as strong as it had been from those early days. Miguel eventually retired, his body worn out from decades of hard work, but he remained on the ranch in a small house Dalton built for him. He spent his days teaching the children stories from his youth and helping Grace with her ever-expanding garden. On the ranch's 20th year under Dalton's ownership, they threw a large celebration. Friends and neighbors came from all over San Diego County. There was music and dancing, abundant food, and much laughter. Dalton made a speech, thanking everyone who had helped make the ranch successful, but especially thanking Grace. 23 years ago, a brave woman stepped off a stagecoach in the middle of a terrible winter storm, he said, his arm around Grace's waist. She could have turned around and gone back to Boston. The ranch was small, the house was sparse, and I was a difficult, lonely man, but she stayed. She worked alongside me, she bore my children, she made this house a home. Everything good in my life comes from that moment when Grace Norton chose to stay and become Grace Xavier. There was not a dry eye in the crowd as Grace kissed her husband. "I would make the same choice 1,000 times over," she said. "This ranch, this life, this love, it is everything I ever dreamed of and more." As the years continued to pass, the Xavier Ranch became a landmark in San Diego County. Daniel married a local girl and brought her to live on the ranch, building his own house on the property. He and his wife gave Grace and Dalton their first grandchildren, twin boys who brought immense joy to their grandparents. Margaret did become a teacher, though she eventually returned to San Diego to teach at the local school. She married a doctor from town, and they built a house halfway between the ranch and San Diego, so she could be close to both her work and her family. Thomas, true to his adventurous nature, joined the Army for a few years, but he eventually returned to California. He started his own small ranch with his father's help and advice, and he married a woman from a neighboring ranch. He visited his parents often, bringing his own growing family to the ranch where he had been raised. Grace and Dalton grew old together, their hair turning gray and then white, their bodies slowing but their minds still sharp. They had been married 40 years when Dalton fell ill one winter. It was nothing like the terrible winter of Grace's arrival, just a mild cold that turned into something worse. Grace nursed him carefully, and with her attention and the doctor's care, he recovered. But the illness scared them both. They were not young anymore, and they knew their time was growing shorter. "I want to tell you something," Dalton said one evening as they sat together by the fire, as they had done so many thousands of evenings before. "I am not afraid of death, Grace, because I have lived a full, happy life. You gave me that. These 40 years with you have been more than I ever hoped for." "Do not talk about death," Grace said, though she knew it was foolish to avoid the subject. "We have time yet." "I hope so. I want to see more of our grandchildren, watch them grow. But whenever my time comes, I want you to know I am grateful for every day we had together." He took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "You are the love of my life, Grace Xavier. You always will be." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "And you are mine. From that first winter when you promised me that spring would come and bring happiness, you have been my North Star. I love you, Dalton. I always will." They sat together in the firelight, holding hands, surrounded by the life they had built together. The house was warm and comfortable, filled with memories of laughter and love. Outside, the ranch stretched into the darkness, thriving and strong. Their children and grandchildren were happy and settled. It was more than either of them had dreamed possible on that frozen day when Grace had stepped off the stagecoach. Dalton did recover from that illness, and they had several more good years together. They celebrated their 45th wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party was smaller than the one 25 years earlier, but no less joyful. Grace looked around at the assembled family, at the love and happiness that filled the room, and felt a deep contentment. This was what she and Dalton had built together, not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of love and family that would continue long after they were gone. When they were finally alone that night, Dalton pulled Grace close. They were both in their late 60s now, their bodies aged but their love as strong as ever. "You ever think about that winter when you arrived?" Dalton asked. "Often. I remember being so cold, so frightened, so uncertain. And I remember you standing there in the frozen mud, promising me that spring would come. It did come. Every year like clockwork. The spring was never just about the weather, though, was it?" Grace said thoughtfully. "It was about hope. About believing that better days were ahead, even when things looked bleak." "You were my spring," Dalton said simply. "You brought warmth and life and happiness back to my world. I was frozen, just like that landscape, until you came." Grace kissed him softly. "We saved each other, I think. We both needed someone to believe in us, to see us as we truly were. That is what love does, is it not? It sees us clearly and loves us anyway. I see you, Grace. I always have from that very first day. And I love what I see: strength, kindness, intelligence, beauty. You are everything." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done for 45 years. In the morning, Grace woke to find Dalton still sleeping peacefully beside her. She lay quietly, watching him breathe, grateful for another day together. More years passed. The ranch continued to thrive under Daniel's management, though Dalton still offered advice and helped when he could. Grace spent her time with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, teaching them to cook and sew, reading to them, telling them stories of the old days. She told them about arriving in California in the middle of a winter storm, about meeting their grandfather for the first time, about the fear and hope she had felt. She told them about the hard early years, the struggles and the triumphs. And she always ended by saying, "Your grandfather promised me that spring would come and bring happiness. He was right. Every spring for 50 years now, I have been happy." On their 50th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered for a massive celebration. Grace and Dalton were both 72 now, moving slowly but still sharp and engaged with the world. The party was held at the ranch, naturally, and people came from all over the county to celebrate. Daniel made a speech about his parents, about the example they had set for him, and his siblings about what marriage should be. 50 years, he said. 50 years of love, partnership, and commitment. They have shown us that true love is not just a feeling but a choice you make every day. A choice to see the best in each other, to work through difficulties together, to build a life of meaning and purpose. Margaret spoke too, her teacher's voice carrying clearly across the crowd. "My mother left everything she knew to come to an uncertain future. My father opened his heart to love after years of loneliness. Together, they created something beautiful, this ranch, this family, this legacy of love. We are all here because of the courage they showed in choosing each other." Thomas, always the emotional one, simply said, "I love you, Ma and Pa. Thank you for showing me what love looks like." Grace and Dalton stood together, accepting the love and gratitude of their family. Dalton spoke briefly, his voice still strong despite his age. 50 years ago, I was a lonely man with a small ranch and a cold house. Then Grace stepped off that stagecoach, and everything changed. She was like spring arriving after a long, hard winter. She brought light and warmth and life to everything she touched. These 50 years have been the greatest gift of my life. Grace, I love you more today than I did on our wedding day, which I would not have thought possible. You are my heart. There was hardly a dry eye in the crowd. Grace hugged her husband tightly. And you are mine, always and forever. The celebration went late into the night. Grace and Dalton sat together, watching their family dance and laugh and celebrate. The ranch buildings glowed with lamplight, and music filled the air. It was a perfect California evening, warm and clear, with stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "We did well, did we not?" Dalton said quietly. "We did very well," Grace agreed. "Look at them all. 3 children, 11 grandchildren, 6 great-grandchildren, and more on the way, all happy, all loved, all thriving. This is what we built together. I could not have done it without you. And I could not have done it without you. We were a team from the very beginning." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands, watching their legacy celebrate around them. Finally, Grace said, "Do you remember what you told me that first day, besides the part about spring coming?" "I told you many things that day. Which part do you mean?" "You said you hoped you would relearn how to be happy. You said you had forgotten." Dalton thought back to that cold day more than 50 years ago. "I did say that. I had forgotten how to be happy. Everything was just work and loneliness and getting through each day." "Did you relearn it? How to be happy?" He squeezed her hand. "You taught me. From that first night when you cooked dinner in our kitchen to the day Daniel was born to this very moment, you have been teaching me joy." "Yes, Grace, I relearned happiness. I am a happy man, and it is all because of you." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the contentment that had been her companion for half a century. "I am happy too, so very happy." They passed their final years in peace and comfort. The ranch was in good hands with Daniel, and they were free to enjoy their time together without the constant pressure of work. They took walks every evening when the weather permitted, going to the creek where they had walked before their wedding all those decades ago. They sat on the porch in the afternoons, watching the grandchildren play. They read to each other in the evenings, Grace's eyesight better than Dalton's now. Grace was 76 when Dalton died. It was peaceful in his sleep, in the bed they had shared for 54 years. One evening he went to bed as usual, kissed Grace good night as he always did, and simply did not wake up in the morning. Grace held his hand and cried, grieving the loss of her partner, her love, her best friend. But she did not regret a single moment of their life together. They had been blessed with 54 years of marriage, far more than many people received. They had built something beautiful together, and that would endure even though he was gone. The funeral was huge. People came from all over California to pay their respects to Dalton Xavier, a man who had been respected and loved by everyone who knew him. Grace stood strong through it all, supported by her children and grandchildren, accepting condolences with grace. After Dalton was buried on a hillside overlooking the ranch he had built, Grace returned to the house they had shared. It felt empty without him, but it was still full of memories. Everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of their life together. The rocking chair he had made for her when she was pregnant with Daniel, the dishes they had bought together in town, the photographs on the wall showing their family growing and changing over the years. Her children wanted her to come live with one of them, but Grace refused. "This is my home," she said firmly. "Your father and I built this life here. I am not leaving it now." She lived for another 7 years, remaining active and engaged with the ranch and her family. She saw more great-grandchildren born. She celebrated Daniel's 30th wedding anniversary. She watched Margaret become the principal of her school. She saw Thomas's ranch grow and prosper, and every evening, weather permitting, she walked to the creek. She would stand there, remembering the night Dalton had first brought her there, remembering all the times they had walked there together over the years. She would talk to him sometimes, telling him about the children and grandchildren, about the ranch, about her day. "Spring came again this year," she would say. "The wildflowers are beautiful, just like you always said. The ranch is doing well. Daniel is taking such good care of it. The children are happy and healthy. You would be proud of them, Dalton. You would be so proud." Grace Xavier died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 83, in the same bed where her husband had died 7 years before. Her children found her in the morning, looking peaceful and almost young, a slight smile on her face. On the nightstand beside the bed was a photograph from their 50th wedding anniversary, showing Grace and Dalton standing together, still in love after all those years. The funeral was as large as Dalton's had been. Grace had been beloved in the community, known for her kindness, her strength, and the example she had set as a wife, mother, and friend. She was buried beside Dalton on the hillside, so they could watch over the ranch together for eternity. At the gathering after the funeral, Daniel stood to speak about his mother. "My mother came to California as a mail-order bride in the winter of 1872, he began. She was 22 years old, alone, frightened, and uncertain. She stepped off that stagecoach into a frozen landscape and met my father, who promised her that spring would come and bring happiness with it. That promise came true, not just once but every year for the rest of her life. She found happiness here, built a life here, raised a family here. And in doing so, she created a legacy that will endure for generations." Margaret spoke next, tears streaming down her face. "My mother taught me that courage is not the absence of fear, but moving forward despite it. She was afraid when she came here, but she chose to stay, to work, to love. She chose happiness even when it would have been easier to give up. That is the lesson I will carry with me always." Thomas, the youngest, said simply, "My parents had a love story for the ages. 54 years of marriage built on respect, partnership, and deep affection. They showed me what true love looks like. I will miss my mother every day for the rest of my life, but I am grateful beyond measure that I got to be her son." The Xavier Ranch continued to thrive for generations. Daniel passed it to his oldest son, who passed it to his daughter, and on through the years. The original adobe house was preserved and expanded, becoming a cherished family landmark. Every generation heard the story of how it all began, with a brave woman stepping off a stagecoach in winter and a man who promised her that spring would come. On the hillside where Grace and Dalton were buried, their descendants planted wildflowers. Every spring, without fail, the hillside exploded into a riot of gold and purple and orange, just as the valley below did. It became a tradition for the family to gather there on the first warm day of spring, to remember the love story that had started it all. And if you visited the ranch today, you would still hear people say, when they told the story of Grace and Dalton Xavier, "He promised her that spring would come and so would happiness." And he was right. The happiness they found together lasted not just their lifetimes, but echoes still through all of us who came after. That is the power of true love. It endures beyond death, beyond time, living on in the hearts and lives of everyone it touches. The story of the mail-order bride who arrived in winter and the cowboy who promised her happiness became a legend in San Diego County. It was a story of courage, of faith, of taking chances on love. It was a story of two lonely people who found each other and built something beautiful together. It was a story of spring following winter, of hope triumphing over fear, of love conquering loneliness. And it was, above all, a true story. A story that began on a cold day in 1872 and continued to echo through the generations. A testament to the transformative power of love and the enduring strength of two hearts that chose to beat as one.